Gentlemen, welcome back. Well, what an excellent round of discussions it's been since the very morning. And after that networking break, firstly, we hope you could visit the sponsors at this time and network with one another. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now it is time for a tech talk on the battle of algorithms, how AI is beating AI its own game. Among rapidly evolving technology advancement, the emergence of AI-enhanced malware is making cyber attacks exponentially more dangerous and harder to identify. As AI-driven attacks evolve, they also must be almost indistinguishable from genuine activity and conducted at an unprecedented speed and scale. In the face of offensive AI, only defensive AI can fight back, detecting even the most subtle indicators of attack in real time and respond with surgical actions to neutralize threats wherever they strike. Well, in this session, what we'll discover is how cyber criminals are leveraging AI tools to create sophisticated cyber weapons, what an AI-powered spoofing threat may look like, and why humans will not be able to spot them, and why defensive AI technologies are uniquely positioned to fight back. Well, for this, we're joined by our eminent speaker, Max Heinemyer, the Director of Threat Hunting, Darktrace, United Kingdoms. Well, Max is a cybersecurity expert with over 9 years of experience in the field, specializing in network monitoring and offensive security. At Darktrace, Max works with strategic customers to help them investigate and respond to threats, as well as overseeing the cyber security analyst team in the Cambridge, UK headquarters. Thank you so much, Max, for joining us today. With this, it is time to have you on the screen and stage. Over to you, Max.
Hi, and welcome everybody. It's good to see you. My name is Max Heinemyer. I'm the Director of Threat Hunting here at Darktrace. Today, I want to talk about the battle of algorithms, how AI is beating AI at its own game. It's going to be super interesting, I hope. We're going to talk about offensive AI, so how artificial intelligence can be used for offensive purposes to conduct better attacks, scale up attacks, be more fast, be more furious, but also about defensive AI, defensive artificial intelligence, what we can do against the advent of offensive artificial intelligence, and how defensive AI is helping already today thousands of organizations to defend against threats that are out there. Let's take a look at the next few things. First, I'm going to elaborate for just a minute or two on who's speaking here, who Darktrace is, who I am. Then I want to talk about what we're seeing in the wild, why this is a problem, then about what we mean by offensive AI, what AI actually means. It's such a big buzzword, isn't it? So I'm going to break it down to what we actually understand under it and give some real-life examples. And then I want to shift to defensive AI, which we need to combat offensive AI, and then give a few case studies and real-life examples. So who is speaking here? As I said, my name is Max. I work for Darktrace. We are a public company with over 30 offices worldwide, over 5,000 customers, and over 1,500 employees. We are the first at-scale deployment of AI in cybersecurity. When Darktrace was created in 2013, we combined artificial intelligence first with cybersecurity. So everybody else in the industry, even up until today, is still trying to find tomorrow's attacks by looking at yesterday's threats. And that clearly doesn't work. You can never extrapolate the attacks that hit tomorrow, the next WannaCry, the next SolarWinds, the next big supply chain attacks, the next targeted ransomware, the next 0 days, the next advanced persistent threats. You can never identify those when you just look at yesterday's attacks. Just by looking at signatures and roots, you can never identify what's going to hit tomorrow. That's a very retrospective approach that the rest of the industry is taking, and we completely flip that on its head. I'm going to talk about our approach a bit later as a response to what we see is going to be offensive artificial intelligence, but that's what we do at the heart. Use a lot of artificial intelligence, a lot of self-learning technology to detect normal, understand normal for every organization and every entity, and then spot anomalies. So instead of looking at yesterday's threats, we focus on you, on your organization, so we can spot the subtle deviations and thus identify new attacks, novel insider threats, new 0 days, and all the malicious things out there. So that's us in a nutshell. But why did we come together today? I want to talk about artificial intelligence on the offensive side. So what is offensive AI? When I say offensive AI, I mean machine learning algorithms. A lot of them, be they supervised, be they unsupervised, be it deep learning, be it maybe reinforcement learning, being used to augment today's cyber attacks. And a cyber attack doesn't just focus on malware, right? Many people think, oh God, it's a virus, it's a cyber attack, it's malware. But there's so much more to a cyber attack, especially these days where we see a plague of ransomware, which first and foremost is always a manual cyber attack, a manual human team infiltrating a company and then trying to steal data and encrypt data. So when we say offensive AI, we actually mean the application of machine learning to augment any phase of the attack lifecycle: initial reconnaissance, initial intrusion, maybe command control traffic, privilege escalation, internal reconnaissance, lateral movement, data exfiltration or encryption of data. Could be any of these steps that's augmented by machine learning in some way or another. Here are a few examples that we see, and I think they are quite speaking in itself. For example, the deepfake images and videos. The images you see on the right-hand side share one thing: none of these people exist. So what we see at the moment already in the wild is a lot of deepfakes being used and a lot of offensive AI for social engineering. One of the first steps to get access to an individual or to infiltrate a company using social engineering. And we've seen that in the wild already with people using deepfake voices, where somebody spoofs the voice of a CEO and then tries to urge the CFO to make a money transfer. And because the voice on the phone sounds like the CFO's CEO, of course they're going to do it. So that's open source technology that can be used by attackers today and has been used already in the wild. It's well documented on social media and the internet. And also, why are these deepfake images so interesting to attackers? Well, often when you conduct your initial attack, when you want to get into a company, when you want to hack into someone, you have to create fake social media profiles. And a lot of the things we see in machine learning these days are very easy to use and can scale up the creation of social media profiles, of fake profiles, of befriending people, of creating trust. Instead of a hacker having to write all the messages themselves or understanding what your victims talk about, what the hierarchy looks like in an organization, how they communicate, what topics they like talking about, what people follow them, how long they've been at a company. That's normally quite tedious as a human hacker to understand and learn and take notes and then craft a spearfish or spear tweet or some other bespoke social engineering. All of that initial legwork I just mentioned, understanding your target and what they talk about and where they sit in the hierarchy and what organization, what skills they have, you can automate that. You can use a lot of existing tools, open source tools and or research in machine learning to automate that. Just crawl over your victim's profile, understand your victim's organization and automate that task. What do people talk about? Natural language processing, what are hierarchies, unsupervised classifiers, what are connections between people, again, supervised classifiers. A lot of what hackers do is quite manual and tedious and tiresome and repetitive. And these are the bits that offensive AI can automate and speed up. Now, already today, it's not a fair game, right? If you think about today's threat landscape, all the rampant ransomware and the targeted attacks and the collateral damage being done by nation-state attackers, look at SolarWinds, look at the Hafnium attacks against Microsoft Exchange servers. It's already not a fair game. Defenders are losing, have been losing for the last 30 years. That's why on the horizon, when we see offensive AI coming up and becoming more popular and more incorporated in attacks, it is going to be a paradigm shift. People are already losing today. Defenders are already losing the game. We see it every day in the news. Even big companies with the biggest budgets in the world are still getting hacked and lost all the data and are still getting encrypted from ransomware. So now imagine the barrier to entry for attackers is lowered even more. Using offensive tools, conducting hacking attacks, it's even easier because the tools you use are smarter, use some form of machine learning. And not only that, but existing attackers can scale up their attacks. What is currently a bottleneck very often for attackers are those tedious human tasks, doing reconnaissance on your victims. Who are they? What do they talk about? When you land in an environment, you infected them somehow, maybe via a zero-day, maybe via social engineering, maybe by an insider threat you bought your access into, or you just purchase access off the dark web. You land on a single device or a handful of devices. You need to understand where you can move around without ringing the alarm bells. Where's your target? Where's your goal? Where's the data server? All these things. Again, that needs a human hacker these days to understand and make best estimates and gather a bit of data. Imagine that phase could be automated. Just auto-configure your command control payload so it beacons out only during business hours, only communicates to websites it's normally talking to, so it blends in with network traffic, only uses user agents that exist on that endpoint anyway. That's normally things that very good hackers and attackers do to try to blend in, try to adjust their payloads and how they communicate with the existing living of the land environment. But that's, again, a very manual and human task. That could be, again, automated by using some form of machine learning. By understanding the environment, payload lands in, and then just learn what's normal, and then adjust its beaconing or its way of laterally moving to whatever it finds there. RDP, SSH, Telnet, existing credentials, brute force, use whatever is there. So if that's coming up, we still have the humans as one of the weakest links, and human teams in particular, defending teams, because let's face it, right now we're losing the game and the workforce is already being overworked. Most companies have no dedicated security teams, no dedicated security budget for advanced detections or for any other form of dealing with advanced attacks. Legacy tools can already not keep up as of today with existing threats. Now we've got this new threat on the horizon that is already in the making. Big nations spend billions of dollars in research into AI, offensive cyber capabilities in military applications. I'm going to talk about one or two prototypes we've created here at Darktrace by ourselves, just to show you that it's not extreme rocket science to create these offensive AI applications. As I mentioned before, these type of attacks are becoming more common. It's not like a whole end-to-end Terminator-style attack that we see where malware just goes rampant and targets its own victims, and it's just a single click of a button, everybody's hacked. But we see that it's an automation continuum, right? Attackers always look to increase their return on invest and automate more of their attack phases. They use scripts, they automate the data exfiltration, they scan the whole internet for victims that they can hack into. So it just makes sense that they're going to accept and adjust their attacks to more automation. As I mentioned before, open source AI cyber weapons exist already, or at least prototypes. Look at things like snap_r. It's a spear tweeting tool, a prototype that has been around since 2017, 2016, for quite a while. There is a framework from Mitra called Caldera to automate red teaming and work with some uncertainty. If you land somewhere and you need to laterally move, how can you make that decision automatically and autonomously? Also think about an implant that lands on a laptop once you did the initial infection, and then instead of beaconing out, doing command and control traffic straight away, and thus maybe getting detected, the implant just sitting there, listening and learning what normal behavior looks like. It's going to contextualize its beaconing and how it reaches out to the command and control server by maybe learning, oh, it always uses .php websites, it always uses these endpoints, it always uses these user agents, it only talks at Chinese business hours, and then adjusts the beaconing payload. So when it reaches out to the malicious command control server to all of these contextualized variants. And that could be done automatically by the malware. Or later on in the attack, let's assume you were successful as the hacker, as the attacker. You exfiltrated 500 gigabytes of data. Now you want to hold your victim to ransom. You might go through that 500 gigabytes via string searches or manually to try to find these very sweet and juicy images, adult images, things like dirty laundry you don't want to have out on the internet, to find those gems as an attacker and hold your victim to really hard ransom. Now, of course, you can do this manually by trawling through the data after you've exfiltrated it. Or you might use something like Yahoo's open source NSFW, not safe for work, neural network, where you just push all the data in, all the images, and it will automatically identify those adult images, those violent images that are normally used for filtering and filter content creation on the internet. So prototypes already exist. This can be done today. And keep in mind, I'm going to show you an example of what we created in the lab when it comes to offensive AI as a prototype. But if the research exists today, if open source tools exist, we know that nation states are spending billions of dollars, ruble, yen, euros, or whatever, on offensive AI research in general, cyber research, and military applications research. And the bad guys always look to continue automating their attacks, right? More automated attacks mean a broader scale of attacks. I can attack more people with the same resources. I can speed up my attacks, thus generate more revenue for my criminal enterprise. So there's a big incentive there to do this. And if we see all of these factors come together, we are absolutely sure that offensive AI is on the horizon. And in fact, some of that, as I've shown you a few minutes ago, is already being used in the wild for things like deepfakes. And just to hammer home this point, here we see an example of what we created at Darktrace. Of course, we use defensive AI. That's what we do at the heart of everything we do. But we created some offensive AI in the email environment to test our own solutions, to test what we call anti-GNI email. We've got a very strong product here in our email environment that we give out to customers, and it learns normal for every email environment. It doesn't use static block lists and signatures and spam lists and just block lists, attachments and bad links. It basically learns every email by itself. It starts to understand every email environment, learn the context and learn what is normal, not look for what is bad. And then it can detect attacks, CFO fraud, insider threat, if new attachments come in, if malicious links are sent, phish, spear phish, and all that kind of stuff. And to test that solution, our defensive email solution, we created an offensive AI engine to create spear phish at scale. And what you see here is one of those examples that was fully created by AI. It's a completely believable email. There's an attachment that blends in. The email address it comes from looks very close or similar to what the defensive organization uses, so the victim organization. And this is basically indistinguishable. This can't be distinguished by humans anymore. It's so close, you can't put the responsibility on your human team to always be alert. There's always going to be a socket of people who can't take the awareness training, who take it, but they're just not cyber aware. Their daily business revolves not around cyber, but other things. And that's good. That's what it should be, right? The tech needs to do a better job. You can't always expect people to find these attacks. Of course, if they can, that's great, but you can't bank on it. And this example was created by our offensive AI, just understanding from open source intelligence who works where in the target victim organization. And of course, it's anonymized here, so don't worry about that. Who talks to whom, who works in which team, who's the junior, who's the senior. And then the AI decided autonomously which emails and relationships whom they normally use in open communication, and then created, based on all of that knowledge, so all the attacker had to do in our labs here is click a button and say, that's my victim organization, and what popped, taking hundreds of hours or tens of hours for a hacker to create this, all by the click of a button done. And that means if we can do this here in the lab, imagine what is on the horizon already happening out there with nation states spending billions on AI research, offensive cyber research, and military applications, right? This is being cooked up already. And what we also know is that the legacy approach can't keep up. What I mean by legacy approach is always looking at yesterday's attacks. I mentioned this earlier, using static roots and signatures. Oh, we've seen this botnet, so tomorrow we can block it. Oh, somebody's been hit by a spear phish, so the other customers are protected. But that just doesn't ring true anymore. That doesn't work even today, because legacy tools are always retrospective, they are static, and they're siloed. And we see it in a nutshell here, mark my words, SolarWinds is the death knell for the first generation security tools by the CISO of eBay Classifieds. Now, what we think is a part of the solution here from the tech perspective is defensive artificial intelligence. Either for today's threats, we see that in our 5,000 customers where we do protect every single day against targeted advanced persistent threats, spear phishing, insider threats, supply chain attacks, the application of advanced tools. And what we use here is self-learning AI. What we mean by that is we don't use just supervised machine learning trained on previous examples of bad, maybe a million files that are bad or a million domains that are malicious. And if you see a new domain, you can say, oh, that new domain looks similar to the previous 1 million domains, so I think it's bad. That is supervised machine learning. That is better roots and signatures. It's better than we had before, but it's not groundbreaking. If a truly novel attack hits, a supply chain attack, 0 day or something that has never been seen before, it's going to evade supervised machine learning classifiers. So what we do instead, we don't use supervised machine learning for detection, we use unsupervised machine learning. We use self-learning AI. It doesn't need lab training data. It doesn't need constant updating, accepts and changes with the environment as the environment changes, and it focuses on you. It learns from scratch your environment, your industrial environment, your cloud, your software service environment, your network, your email environment, your home office workers environment. And then when something big happens that looks like a cyber attack, even if we've never seen it before, it's going to spot it and stop it as it happens. So it's extremely robust. It doesn't take data from other customers' organizations. It's focused on you. If Darktrace doesn't have an internet connection to the Darktrace headquarters, it can still run 100% perfectly fine because it doesn't need constant updating of threat intel feeds and new signatures and routes. But we don't stop there. We don't just alert bad things. We can also stop them as they happen. We call that autonomous response. After learning self and detecting these attacks, Darktrace can always bring it back to this baseline, to this normal behavior. So when Darktrace sees a laptop starting crypto mining and scanning the network and beaconing out to some random domains and trying to exfiltrate data, anti-GINA, the autonomous response, would do the following. It would enforce the normal behavior. Whatever that device normally does, it can continue doing, going to SharePoint, going to normal websites, administering normal devices over RDP. But the crypto mining, the encryption of data, the network scanning, the beaconing to random endpoints, all these things that are very out of normal, that's going to be stopped by integrating into your existing security stack or by native response mechanisms that we use. And that could be in the email environment, that could be in the network environment, that could be in the software as a service environment like Microsoft 365. And because it doesn't need a predefined response, you don't need to say, if you see this 0 day, then close this account. If you see this supply chain attack, then stop this behavior from happening, which you can't predefine anyway. It's able to take autonomous decisions. So even if a 0 day ransomware hits, even if a supply chain attack hits, to respond to it and pull the plug. And that's really what needed when offensive AI is going to hit, because it's going to be too fast. I mean, today's threats are too fast already, but offensive AI is going to, again, increase the speed of attacks. It's going to be much too fast for humans to react. So we need something where the machine can take autonomous response. And here's just a case study of things that we see, and I've got two with me, and how defensive AI works. So this is a case where we saw in an email environment a targeted spear phishing attack, a CEO fraud basically against one of our customers. And it was somebody impersonating the CEO, talking to the finance department, trying to change the bank account details of the CEO to their own bank account details, to a money mule. So they wanted basically the company, the finance team, to start paying the CEO's wage to the attackers. And this is one of the hardest attacks to defend against, because there's no malicious attachment. It's targeted to your organization. There's no malicious link that you could detonate, and the language perfectly blends in. Now, luckily, anti-GINA email identified this and held back the email and locked the links in the later emails. So this never reached the finance team, but normally this would have gone through straight away and would have been allowed by almost every email solution out there. What's interesting about this attack is that it's written in perfect English. The email address mimics the name of the actual CEO, and it's been anonymized here, but you can see it's the Gmail address. In other scenarios, we see that some people even buy domains and let them age for months before they conduct these attacks, and the domains look very similar to the actual victim organizations. So we detected this by saying, look, this looks like a spoof, it looks like the CEO, but it isn't really. It's a free mail address, but again, this could be, targeted registered address. So it's not just based on the fact that it's Gmail. The tone and style is very unusual. The CEO normally doesn't talk to the finance team about these kind of details. Normally, the finance team doesn't receive this kind of communication. And there were many other anomalies. So we didn't say, this is a malicious email address, therefore we're going to block it. We said this communication looks very out of the norm. We never see this. It's extremely unusual. And our defensive AI in the email environment took precise action and blocked the email from ever being delivered. So we didn't need constant updating of malicious spam lists. We didn't need to say, oh, I don't want to see these attachments, and this finance user may never receive this type of communication from the CEO. This was all done by the machine learning out of the box. All the heavy lifting was done, no tuning required. And this is one example in the email environment, which hopefully shows our approach and how we do this, and what we mean by defensive AI. But I've got one more with me, where autonomous response neutralized a 0-day ransomware. And this is a very interesting case. This was a case in a proof of value. So in a trial deployment, we do free 30-day trials for you, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But this was such a case where we just ran a trial, and we sat in one country of this global company, an electronics manufacturer. And in this part of the environment, this country, there was no infection present. But in another country, in another part of the environment that we didn't even see, there was an existing attacker. And a few days after Darktrace had deployed, just 10 business days or so, the attacker from the country we didn't even see and have coverage of started encrypting data into the environment that Darktrace had visibility of. So it's a worst case scenario, pre-existing infection, imperfect visibility. We didn't even see the initial infection. And we've just been in there for 10 business days to learn what is normal, right? Not for 6 months, not for 2 or 3 years. We don't need that long anyway, but it was very early in the proof of value in the trial process. Now, what you see here is the ransomware activity when it started. You see the normal pattern of life for the device. So Darktrace knows from the bit it has seen what normal activity is on that SMB server and how the SMB activity looks and feels like, down to the application layer, down to every SMB write and SMB read. And you see every single one of these dots here is a Darktrace detection, a Darktrace anomaly. And at one point, Darktrace said, you see the big spike in the middle, hang on, this device is trying to make a lot of unusual SMB reads and writes, and they look like they're trying to encrypt something. It's extremely unusual. It doesn't look like a backup. The file extensions are unusual for the environment. This device never communicates over SMB, this type of SMB with this type of device, and tries to access unusual Dropbox files that sit locally in SMB. So Antigena kicked in, our autonomous response, and said, I'm going to quarantine this device for 24 hours, and thus stopped any encryption from being successful. This is a blog post, folks. So if you're interested in all the tech details, go to the Darktrace website and take a look at Stop the Clock. And there's a lot of ransomware blog posts. When I say zero-day ransomware, I don't mean a zero-day exploit. I mean a ransomware that had never been seen before. So the signature didn't exist, hadn't been seen in open source intelligence, and the attack was bespoke and targeted. Spear phishing, new command and control domains, targeted campaign, targeted big game hunting against this one company, and a new malware that had never been seen before. So again, a worst case scenario, and Darktrace stopped the attack from doing any damage, although we had imperfect visibility and it was the worst case scenario. And this was out of the box. This wasn't Darktrace after 2 years of tuning or, a lot of human manpower thrown at it. It was literally putting it in, learning by itself, enabling the autonomous response, and the ransomware attack was stopped. So we would love to show this, everything I've talked about, except for the offensive AI, in your environment on your data. If you got interested, please get in touch. There's minimal investment from your side, and we'd love to talk to you more. Thank you so much for listening in today, and all the best. Goodbye.
Well, thank you so much.